I'm delighted to be joined today by Dan Demetriou. Dan, could you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, my name is Dan Demetriou. I'm an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Minnesota at Morris. I am an ethicist and social political philosopher. And yeah, so I write on those fields. I wrote a bunch of essays on honor. I've written a little bit on philosophy of law. But mostly recently, I've been writing on monuments, sex ethics, immigration, things like that.
Well, to address the elephant in the room, I absolutely butchered your last name, but hopefully we can get past that.
Yeah, Demetriou.
Yep. We're going to be talking about guns and your argument for a pro tanto right to own firearms for reasons of self-defense. I was wondering, what's the usual strategy that pro-gun philosophers use to defend gun rights? And then how does your strategy differ?
Yeah, the usual. So, as you may know, and as your viewers may know, philosophy is dominated by liberal, or in the American sense, liberal, but left progressive minds. Okay. Some libertarians manage to get jobs in philosophy. So the gun rights debate, as you imagine, is kind of dominated by an exchange between these groups. Even some conservatives who write about guns then kind of follow the framework set by libertarians. And that framework's fine. I have no problem with it. I think my views are compatible with a libertarian defense of gun rights. But the libertarian defense of gun rights is going to be one that argues essentially that we have a prima facie right to firearms for the sake of effective self-defense and effective resistance to the government. And so the debate is hashed out between those two traditionally. And well, okay, do guns really make you individually safer? Maybe not. Well, maybe even that they make us individually safer, they make us collectively less safe, maybe, so that's why we shouldn't have them. Or you really can't resist the government effectively, or whatever, right? So it's all fought on that battle line. Now, one of my procedures one of my methods as a philosopher is to always just ask myself, when I'm about to argue something, are the reasons I'm about to give the reasons that I really have, or the motives that I really have? I'm a very self-reflective philosopher. Okay, so I find it most interesting to try to sound my own intuitions about why I'm for something, and try to formulate arguments that reflect the true reasons why I'm pro or con something. Okay, and beat those into philosophical shape. Sometimes the existing debate does align, but this case it didn't. Okay, and when I feel like an existing debate doesn't align with like why I hold the position emotionally or rationally or whatever, I want to know if I can make a good case for it, though. If subjected to scrutiny, my sort of gut is leading me in the right direction. And so, I do have these dignitarian impulses. They were driving my work on honor. I also co-authored with Bob Fisher, who's a very prominent vegan philosopher, among other things, effective altruism, etc. But we co-authored a paper, defending certain hunting on dignitarian grounds. So I've been thinking about this issue and getting comfortable with my dignity intuitions, And it seemed to me there was something to be said to represent what I think is a very kind of conservative rationale for gun rights, that isn't predicated upon their mere efficacy at self-defense and revolution or state resistance or something like that. So dignity matters to the conservative mindset, and dignity matters to the leftist mindset too. All right, so it's kind of, as a narrative, my essay is interesting because I'm appealing constantly to intuitions. I'm pumping intuitions that leftists will agree with. Okay, intuitions about dignified lifestyles when it comes to disability or LGBT or something like that, or women's rights, and just showing that these same sorts of intuitions also apply to self-defense, which is an area that they traditionally have worried less about, but whereas conservatives worry a lot about. Okay, so although I'm advocating for a position that libertarians are going to like more, I'm advocating it in a way that appeals to the left, and so who's usually hostile to the pro-gun cause. So that's what I tried to do, and I wanted to see if it would work, and it managed to get published in a good philosophy journal, Phil Studies, and so we'll see if it gets any uptake in the community. But yeah, so I'm open to new front. Hopefully, I've opened a new front in the gun rights debate.
I mean, yeah, I think you have. I really like the approach. So you're trying to not only find a kind of truth maker for the intuition that you have, but find the right one, right? You're trying to not only get the right answer, but get it for the right reason. And you're trying to do it in a way that appeals to both the left and the right in an issue that divides the left and the right. Okay.
Yeah, or at least for the honest reasons. At least for the honest reasons.
Yeah.
At least my reasons, even if they're wrong. And they just so happen to, though, I think, hopefully speak to my leftist readers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's just launch into the argument. So why do you think that people have a pro tanto right to own firearms?
Right. So, well, they may also have a pro tanto right to own firearms on the basis of effective self-defense and effective resistance to, right? So, but the dignitarian account begins with just our idea that if we have a right to do something, we have a right to do it in a dignified manner. Okay, so if we have a right to self-defense, we have a right to defend ourselves in a dignified manner. And my point of departure, the thing that got me really thinking about this argument was some events that happened about 12 years ago now, where some Second Amendment groups were lobbying to allow guns on campuses in the U.S. And there was hue and cry about this and so forth. And the university, let's see, it was Colorado State University, their security team published this piece that argued, look, if you're a woman and you're getting sexually assaulted, you should, scream, but you should there are other things you could do. You could, like, say, urinate on yourself, defecate on yourself, puke, you could do things like this. And everybody hated this advice. Okay, so obviously the right was like mocking it, but like feminists didn't like this idea either. Okay, and so they took the page down. All right, you could still see screenshots of it and so forth, but they took the page down. And so I'm like, were they just like out of their mind and just being idiosyncratic when they gave this advice? And no, this is actually given in various self-defense books like See Sally Kick Ass and so forth. And I'm like, well, yeah, so we have something here. And then there were articles written to the effect that well, somewhere along the line, I forget who, this one law journalist Rosen argued that so the Second Amendment is going to start being argued on dignitarian grounds And I said, yes, this is right. This is exactly where we're going with it. So, yeah, so if you have that intuition that a woman being raped has a right not only to self-defense, but to self-defense in a dignified manner, then you're already on board, right? We're off to the races. And now, and after that, it's a bunch of cleanup work, okay? So, yeah, the first premise is that when we have a right to resist, we have a prima facie right to dignified resistance. Even if, and so the question is like, well, what if the dignified resistance is actually less effective? Because there's a case to be made that sometimes self-defense may actually dignified resistance, especially if dignity requires violence, and that's something we need to talk about, will be less effective than nonviolent resistance, which may be undignified. And that case is maybe even stronger in the case of resisting the state. So, you know, this important Harvard researcher Chenworth has compiled for about a decade this case that, you know, peaceful resistance, protest marches, and, you know, hunger strikes and so forth, they have a better record of advocates getting what they want than violent resistance. And so if that's true, then that really kind of undermines a right to guns for that purpose, right? But what I'm saying is well, if it turns out that violent resistance is in some cases more dignified than non-resistance, then we have a prima facie right to the more violent, even though less effective form of resistance.
Okay, and one clarificatory question, which may turn into an objection later down the line, is when you're comparing the different modes of resistance, are you saying that okay, so like suppose I have two means of resistance, A and B, and one is dignified and the other is positively undignified, like if I throw up on myself. So your claim is that you have a right to the more dignified form of resistance in that case. But suppose I have two forms of resistance, A and B, and both neither are strictly undignified, but one is more dignified than the other. So would your claim be you have a pro tanto right in that case to the more dignified form of resistance as well, or is it only when you're comparing it to an undignified form of resistance?
Yeah, the most dignified. I think okay. We'll see if it holds up. I mean, these are not. Sure. I haven't thought a lot about that question, but my instinct is that that you have a prima facie right to the most dignified. Again, prima facie, it is definitely, or you know, pro tanto, strictly speaking, I mean, it is outweighable.
Yeah.
So okay. A lot of other things to consider.
Sure. Well, like now let's consider the other big thing, which is whether in some cases, or even in many cases, firearm use is a more dignified way to defend yourself than some of the other means available. Could you go into that issue a little bit?
Well, it is violent. And there's something about violence that tends to make things dignified. Now, there are certain sort of really predictable weak spots that violence could make resistance undignified. So violence, like to talk about, I mean, like if a 5-year-old kicks you in the shins, you know, and it looks like he's going to kick you again, I don't think, I think responding in a violent way would actually be less dignified. I think violence is not going to be dignified if it's inapt. I talk about that in the paper. So if violent resistance would not be consonant with your purposes, with your aims, then it's not dignified. So I talk about that with regard to like Martin Luther King's aims versus Malcolm X's aims. I'm not saying that Martin Luther King's campaign of nonviolent resistance to discrimination against blacks in the United States was less dignified than Malcolm X's because given Martin Luther King's aims, it would have been counter his aims, and so he shouldn't have done that. I think a violent response, if you're going to suck at it really bad, is actually kind of cringy and, kind of is very undignified. So yeah, you have to be kind of adroit, as I put it, so you have to be adroit. It has to be apt, probably some other things. But so setting aside that, there's something about violence that is dignified, that dignifies resistance, I think. Why? Well, it is more agentive. It claims for yourself a certain sort of agency in the encounter. So like if you're being raped and you sort of I give this example in the paper, if you kind of roll up like an armadillo into a very effective fetus position, and the attacker just can't get any purchase on you, it's sort of you're sort of an inert feature in the decision space. It's just the attacker decides when he's tired out. Okay, it's not game theoretic, it's just decision theoretic for him. Is it worth it or not to keep trying to peel this person open so I could rape them out? Okay. And even if another type of defense is not just it is where you make yourself gross and disgusting, which we already talked about in the Colorado State case. And even then, it's like the attacker's just deciding whether this is, he's deciding when to end the conflict, as it were. But when you fight back, when you're violent, and I'm going to understand violent resistance as fighting back in some way. When you're fighting back, you are at least claiming for yourself or trying to be someone who also decides the terms of the conflict, decides, what the fate is of the attacker, that he doesn't get to break it off whenever he just is like, well, this is not working for me. And so there's something dignifying about that. You're sort of elevating yourself relative to the attacker. And yeah, I find that to be kind of dignifying and agentive, or maybe dignifying because it's agentive.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, so like just to understand, I have you right. You think intuitively it seems like there's something generally more dignified about violent resistance compared to non-violent resistance, assuming that it's not inapt or like it's not unadroit, and it's skillfully done. And so there are cases where this seems to be the case, like when you're comparing somebody who violently resists like their sexual assaulter versus making it less likely that they'll sexually assault you by curling into the fetal position. It seems like there's something more dignified about the more violent form of resistance. And then you have this theory for something like a theory for why this might be more dignified.
Right. And you're right to put it just perfectly, because my theory may be completely wrong. I don't want my argument does not rely upon the correctness of my speculations in this one section about what it is about violent resistance that's especially dignified. I'm just going with the intuitions about cases. And I think that people who have dignity intuitions, and I'm not sure everyone does. Okay. So I'm not sure. Okay. I'm not sure everyone has dignity intuitions. I think a lot of professors, I'm learning that a lot of philosophy professors kind of don't have dignity intuitions. Some of them, honest to God, I think don't have them. Philosophy kind of does not select for that sort of thumotic type. Okay.
Yeah.
Some do, but pretend they don't. Okay. Because they think it's like, bestial or something like that. Or, they don't want to, like, an easy way to win this argument is just claim you don't have that intuition. Fine. But I think a lot of readers who are open and honest about their intuitions about dignity will we'll agree that like there's something especially dignified about fighting back.
Yeah. I mean, so we can kind of circle back round to the theoretical questions around dignity later on. But just so people don't like lose the train of thought. So you've argued that, you know, sometimes violent resistance is more dignified. Like in many cases, violent resistance is more dignified than non-violent resistance equal. So how do you now think about this in connection to firearms?
Yeah, because well, if you have a if you have a right to dignified resistance, then you have a right to effective dignified resistance. Firearms make your if violence is the way to have the dignified resist, if violence is necessary to dignified resistance or more dignified, then you have a right to effective dignified resistance. So that makes the case for guns. Guns make your violent resistance more effective.
Sure. I mean, so
if you have a right, if you have a right to education, you have a right to a good education. You know, if you have a right to water, you have a right to clean water. And when people say these things, they don't mean you have a right to dirty water or, you know, bad education. They mean you have a right to good education. And so if you have a right to dignified resistance, you have a right to, you know, effective and I don't mean like the government should supply it, but you have a right to access, you know, the tools necessary to give you effective dignified resistance.
Mm-hmm. And importantly, your claim is that even if there's a more effective form of resistance, the fact that violent resistance, in this case with guns, is more dignified, can make it permissible for you to go for the more dignified form of resistance, even if it's less effective than the method.
So you have a right to effective dignified resistance, which may not be as effective as the undignified resistance. Right. So you have a right to the most effective, prima facie right to the most effective of the dignified forms of resistance. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that I do have dignity intuitions. You know, like I did in the cases that you just gave me. But then, you know, I think about some of the firearm cases and my dignity intuitions don't fire, and I'm wondering why that is, and maybe if you can sell me on you know what I'm not seeing. So, in the case of like somebody curling up into the fetal position versus violently resisting her attacker, I have the dignity intuition there. But in a case where somebody has two options, one is they have a firearm and that's how they protect themselves against a home invasion, versus a more effective but less violent form of resistance, say installing fake security cameras outside of their house that statistically is more likely to deter home invasions. I guess I don't really have the intuition that the fake security camera thing is less dignified. And if that's not less dignified, then I'm wondering, even if the sort of dignity principle is true in other cases, it doesn't seem to have moral importance in this case, at least to me.
Yeah. Yeah, cases are hard. One is there was a second variable I think you introduced there of deterring home invasion versus resisting an actual home invasion. So I'm not sure. Wouldn't the violent resistance analog be a sticker that says, you know, defended by, you know, some people have these corny stickers, you know, defended by 357 Smith and Wesson or something like that, or whatever, you know, or you know, so I don't know, you know, I don't know if the Smith and Wesson sticker is the Smith and Wesson sticker more dignified than the security cameras? I don't know. And if is the presumption that the security cameras are used to alert police or alert a homeowner who then may shoot you? I don't know how the criminal's processing this.
Yeah.
So
I mean, so like, it's not clear like how much it matters how the criminal is processing it. It might just be if you have security cameras outside of your house in general, that's going to make criminals less likely to do a home invasion. And so, if empirically it turns out that they're more they're more likely to do a home invasion if you go for the gun option instead of the camera option, then you might think, okay, as a matter of like practical rationality, you should choose the camera. But you might also think in this case you don't have a moral right to a gun, which I know is a big leap. But so like you can respond to that. But I was also wondering, is there a kind of set of cases when we're thinking about guns where there's a more effective means of like violent resistance available, but it's less dignified? So like, what's a specific example that you have in mind in the case of guns, where guns would be the more dignified form of resistance, but some other means might be more effective?
Well, what are the, I mean, other than the puking thing, or
yeah, right.
I guess what, so you could like, so if I'm trying to keep it not just I'm trying to keep a case where you're actually under attack versus, you know, there's an actual attack going on, or we're trying to deter. Those are two different things. But
yeah,
you know, I don't know, like I guess you could have like a bunch of barking dogs. So suppose that, you know, you know, suppose you like to jog at night or whatever, and you're like, well, I could maybe have a gun. Now, see, a complexity here is that like having a gun doesn't really honestly protect you that well on your own in a lot of cases. We could talk about that, but so things get very interesting if two of us are running and we have guns, and you could protect me and I could protect you. Or if, you know, and not necessarily together, but just if like 10% of the people that are going in convenience stores have guns, then things get very interesting for criminals. That's where I think we get to a good place. But you know, I mean, I could be easily assaulted from behind or whatever, even if I have a gun on me or whatever. So, but yeah, I mean, if my options are, well, look, I'm just going to run with like yappy dogs that'll just raise this huge alarm if someone tries to mess with me. You know, there's like small dogs, right? Because I guess, you know, you don't want, because dogs could be violent. You know, if they're like huge pit bulls, then it's the equivalent of a gun or something like that, right? But just they're harmless, but they're loud, and they could really deter or make a criminal want to break off his attack because they're just making such a din. Versus using a gun on the attacker. Yeah, that might be one. Yeah,
right.
And yeah, so yeah, my intuition is that you know, do I have a right to the more dignified, and again, I'm not saying an obligation, I'm saying a right to the more dignified form of resistance. In that situation, I think, yeah, definitely we do. I think it's really a bad thing to force people to defend themselves in undignified ways on behalf of what? On behalf of the attackers, or offenders. I don't think we should have to do that for reasons I talk about in the paper. Things are more interesting for its innocent third parties, you know. Yeah. But but yeah, that would be a case. So again, like again, is this some weird take? I don't think so, because like if you look outside of the self-defense literature, we're kind of used to this. So I give this example of this classic thing that strikes right to the heart of this imaginarium is this person in a wheelchair at the bottom of the courthouse steps. When you talk about this, this is like you're hitting them right in their soft spot, right? They care about this stuff, right? The person, the wheelchair bound person at the bottom of the courthouse steps, just looking up, trying to get justice, and but he can't ascend because he's in a wheelchair, and it's all these steps. And so I say, well, look, I mean, so one enterprising and well-motivated magistrate says, oh, I hired these really beefy bailiffs, I call them the beefy bailiffs. And what they do is they will pick you up out of your wheelchair and carry you up this courthouse steps and take you to wherever you want to go. And it's much more convenient. You don't have to wheel yourself up some ramp. It's much better for you. You should do this. Whatever. They wear deodorant, whatever. They won't sexually assault you, whatever. But and when I give this to audiences, they're like, yeah, they all get it. Like, no, you have to have the ramp. You have to have the ramp. If the wheelchair bound person wants to be lifted up by the beefy bailiffs, fine. Maybe they need, some more affection in their lives or something, but damn it, people have a right to the ramp, even though it's more onerous. And, right. So this is just what I'm tracking in the realm of self-defense.
Yeah. So I definitely have the intuition about the ramp case. So like then the question is just, does it carry over to self-defense? Okay. So like you mentioned how like,
do you think fighting back? Do you think fighting back with your fist is more is more dignified than the fetal position response or the defecating on yourself response? Okay.
Yeah, I do. So, like, one warrior is like, okay, so sure, there's a pro tanto right to the more dignified form of resistance, even if it's slightly less effective. But if we have lax gun control policies, that will like massively raise the risk that innocent third parties will be killed. We can talk about cases in which they're killed by criminals, and then also cases in which they kill themselves, because there might be importantly different questions to ask there. But so like start with the minority of cases. So like the majority of gun deaths in the US come from suicides, but like in the minority of cases where the availability of guns allows like attackers to kill innocent third parties, do you think that consideration is enough to defeat the individual dignitarian right to have a gun and defend themselves in the most dignified manner?
No. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and for those reasons, I think the place to look for those reasons have been given by, I mean, because on that whole question about, well, do my individual rights, should they be outweighed by the group consequences of my exercising the right? That whole debate does not turn on the dignity question, and for that, I would look to I think people like Humer and Timothy Shao have talked about that really well. I think their cases are. I'm not. I don't have it really quite in mind what their arguments are on that, but I would look to them for that. But so a lot of what we have probably this. I don't really know how many more gun homicides we would have if it really depends on the group at hand, so there's some places in America where everyone has guns and there's like no homicide, and some places where people have guns and there are a lot, and none of that kind of maps onto the gun laws. Now, of course, you could say, well, if they were nationwide gun bans, then the local gun bans would be more effective. I don't believe that. I think what we're seeing in Europe, especially in Sweden, is that's not true. That so we're seeing that places with strong with tight gun control, if inserted with a group of people determined to do violence, will just disregard those laws and can get around them. And definitely, we see even like weird stuff, like in the UK, you have a lot of knife attacks and machete attacks, and in weirdly in Sweden a lot of hand grenade killings. So I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, look up the hand grenade issues in Sweden.
Okay. Yeah.
So of course this is a recent problem because of the mass migration to Sweden. So but yeah, it may be one of those situations where we need people to we're in this unhappy place in between the two strategies, where either some super tight gun control strategy would lower gun homicides, and maybe some very loose gun control strategy would lower gun homicides, where imagine a scenario in which like literally just people had to have guns, which I'm not advocating for, but suppose people just had to be armed. Like, cops could be like, "Where's your gun?" And we're not didn't go through legal hell if they shot attackers, and so forth. Then I could see a scenario in which gun homicides would reduce really dramatically. But we may be in this neither fish nor fowl strategy that's actually worst case scenario. But we would still have, even if the tight gun control strategy was effective for curbing handgun violence, I would still be concerned about state oppression, what the implications of that are for state oppression. And I'm not happy with I'm just not happy with the scenario like you guys have there in the UK, where so now I could just be attacked by someone with a machete and I can't do anything. In fact, and for the same reason that you guys are so anti-gun, you guys also criminalize having pepper spray, as far as I understand. Is that not right? You can't.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know anyone who owns pepper spray, so that might be the case.
Yeah, you guys can't have pepper spray. It could be used for offensive purposes or something like that. And then it's just like, well, so it's just, the bigger guy wins, or the bigger, more aggressive guy wins every time. I don't like that sort of scenario. I don't think anyone really should be happy with what's going on right now.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so like, related, there's the question about suicides, and I think this connects to questions of dignity. So in the euthanasia debate, there's like a very active debate about whether it's possible to commit suicide with dignity, and whether committing suicide in some cases is more dignified than continuing to live one's life. And so if you were on the side of the debate where you thought, suicide is never dignified, in fact it's very undignified, or at least if you thought that in most cases it's undignified, then you might have the following worry about the argument. So in cases of self-defense, gun ownership will allow people to be more to like resist in a more dignified way. But you might think lax gun control laws increase the rate of suicides, because like gun suicides are easier to pull off and easier to do spontaneously than planned suicides, and hence people are more likely to go through with them, and they tend to do them in like fits of emotional distress in a way that like more deliberative methods of suicide you can't do. So if it turned out that like lax gun control laws led to more suicides, and you thought that suicides are undignified, or at least they are in these cases, then you might think lax gun control laws are leading to a rise in indignity. And so then the defense no longer looks so dignitarian.
Yeah. So a couple things. The first, I guess, the most obvious thing is that we again enter into this realm of should we give up individual rights because of some group consequence? And I'm not sure about that. I'm also not sure about I could be persuaded by this, though. I mean, if it has catastrophic consequences, I mean, I'm not like some individual rights absolutist or something like that. Okay. The second thing is that, well, even if you're a deontologist, you're going to be worried about, you're not like necessarily a deontologist of it. You're not like maximizing deontology, deontology. So,
yeah,
if you could prevent 2 rapes by raping 1 person and getting away with it, mm-hmm. right? Like, should you do that? So that's not clear. But I do definitely concede. I think my sense of the research is that,
yeah,
just having more guns around will increase suicides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it isn't like just substituting people jumping off bridges or overdosing on whatever. It does seem to increase. There's something about it that does seem to increase the number of suicides, and that is that's a bad result. Yep.
Yeah. And so because an individual.
I mean, is it? I also want to weigh though that against oppressive regimes.
Okay. Yeah.
I want to weigh that against all the other huge costs of having an unarmed population, which quickly I think becomes kind of docile. Although, I mean, to get really deep, I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but the argument can be made that guns actually make people too docile. Like this is shit I worry about. Okay, so like once you carry a gun, even for like laws that are reasonably just. I'm not saying just like unjust DAs that are just they're anti-gun and they're going to try to go after you or whatever. I do think that like if you have a gun, you have to avoid confrontational situations more than if you don't. I myself do believe this because then if you are you definitely cannot be picking fights. You should not be talking any sort of shit whatsoever. Okay. And so I think there's this interesting dynamic going on. I have a friend online who bangs on about this issue. He's from Singapore. And he's like, one reason that American gun owners are so politically inert in, you don't see them going out and protesting a lot and stuff like this. Or like the left, usually without guns, is way more prone to protest on the street and, cause public disorder than people on the right. Why is this? Because I think people on the right are like, we have our guns. And if shit really hits the fan, we could take this over really, in a week or so, whatever. Right. They keep resting on this self-assured, thing that, well, if we need to take matters in our own hands, we could take matters in our own hands. And they keep losing everything politically because they have this all or nothing strategy. And it becomes more all or nothing because they have the guns. They don't feel like they have to walk the streets or, shout. But there of course are a host of other psychological factors going on to why the conservative mind doesn't like shouting on the street. Okay. So give these people guns and then they won't protest and they will, and not be, they'll flee confrontations, precisely because they have a gun and they don't want to go through, the court system and everything like that. So you have to back down from every sort of insult and so forth that you might not back down from if you were unarmed. And so, yeah, it could have real dignitary costs to, there could be dignitary costs to being armed, as well. So sometimes they say, you know, an armed society is a polite society. Not really, because like not everyone's armed, and you know there's two sets of rules going on, and so you could have unarmed impolite people talking to armed people who have to just, you know, bear the insults because it's just like, well, what am I going to do? You know? And so, yeah, there are very interesting things going on here. Yeah, guns are not, you know, it's not like some royal road to dignity and conflict by any means.
Yeah. But I mean, so do you think that like when it comes to resisting government tyranny considerations in favor of like lax gun laws, do you think the scales favor gun ownership over non-gun ownership, given the thing that you just said?
Yeah, it may make it may set back their political interests. Yeah.
Okay.
But again, we have this issue of, well, you know, do I want to win undignified or win dignified? I give this example in the paper of what I thought was like my, you know, what some might think is the best counterexample to my view, which is the nonviolent campaign by Gandhi to oust the British colonialists. And I'm definitely moved by this one scene in the movie Gandhi, which is, I guess, fairly accurate to what happened, where there's this like symbolic raid. They call it a raid, so they take for themselves this sort of agentive response. I want to note that rhetorically, but the Darasana Salt Works raid, and so there were guards, these Indian guards protecting the salt works. And Gandhi's supporters, you know, all line up. It's like a mile long, and they walk up, and the guards beat them, and they're dragged off. And the next file walks up, and they're beat, and they're dragged off. And this goes on for hours. And it is dignified, I think, and it's nonviolent. But I asked the question in the essay of, what if magically all the Indians had guns? Then would that raid be dignified? And my intuition is like, clearly not. Why would you just walk up and get your ass beat when you have the guns to just force the British to go? And I'm not saying massacre the British, but just give this ultimatum that they have to go. I think that would be way more dignified if they had guns, right? So there's this like two-dimensional thing going on where it's like, okay, if you don't have guns, then there are certain, then there's maximally dignified options for you, okay? But okay, having the guns to actually solve the problem yourself opens the door to new, more dignified responses, which actually may be less heroic. So but I would rather be part of a movement that had a lower chance of success, but prosecuted its cause in a dignified manner. Than one that prosecuted its cause in an undignified manner and got its way. I just have this aversion myself to this sort of passive aggressive way of getting your results. Once legality has left, so we're not talking about democratic processes or whatever else. We're going to just we're going to lay in front of the street. We're going to lay ourselves across the street, and which is passive aggressive, right? We're not hurting you. We are kind of hurting you, but we're not like attacking you, and we are going to act peace. We're not going to fight you when you try to move us off. But I just find this absolutely disgusting. I cannot believe that people lower themselves to this. But it apparently works. At least it's working for a while. I think, it isn't like, I take evolution as a sign of like what strategies kind of consistently work. And we definitely evolved to resist with violence. And so I don't think that this is a winning strategy long term, given the profound instincts we have to defending ourselves violently. I think they're just capitalizing on a lot of rules about, a lot of norms about, decorum, and rules about, like high trust. They're just burning high trust. They're just relying upon high trust solutions to their way of their strategies, but they're destroying these high trust societies. They're destroying the patients. They're burning it up at a increased pace. And you're seeing people who are completely decent, nice, nonviolent people saying shit they would not have said 10 years ago about what they'd like to do to protesters. And so it is, just totally normal people being like, oh, you should just drive over these fuckers. You know what I mean? And this is stuff like, if I had said this to somebody, in the 80s, they'd be like, what are you talking about? But now it's just like grandmas are saying this stuff because, they've been pushed this much with this sort of passive aggressive sort of strategy politically. So, but yeah, what can I say? I have these, I find it like reprehensible myself. I can't, I wouldn't be able to do it.
I mean, so assuming it is reprehensible, what strategy would you recommend, say, like environmental protesters, Extinction Rebellion do, given the beliefs that they have? So, by their own lights, given the beliefs they have about like imminent climate disaster, should climate protesters pursue an aggressive and violent approach where they blow up pipelines, as opposed to sitting in the middle of the road?
Yeah, no. What should abortion protesters do? What should abortion protesters do?
I mean, so I have a piece on my Substack, and I published it in a university magazine where I argued that even on many plausible pro-choice views, it's going to be permissible sometimes to use violence to assassinate abortion providers in some cases. And I think there'll be many more cases on the pro-life view where this is permissible, and I think probably in the real world this will be okay sometimes to do, even if it brings the pro-life movement into disrepute. Because like if you just do it occasionally, or if you do it stealthily and secret and don't make it a public assassination, and you save many lives, it seems like that's just going to be justified for like standard reasons of defending other people. And even if you're pro-choice, you'll probably think, unless you endorse infanticide, that at some point in pregnancy, the fetus becomes a person. That's what I think. And if you think that, then I think you'll think that there are some cases of late-term abortion in which it would be permissible to defensively kill an abortion provider.
Yeah.
So I
don't have some like super original thing to say about this sort of stuff. So like, yeah, first, you exhaust your legal means to a reasonable extent when it looks like, when you're like, okay, this is a grave injustice, then I think you move to civil disobedience. So nonviolent, but also illegal actions.
Like sitting in the road.
No, like it doesn't have to be that. But so the sitting on the road thing, it's bad for a lot of reasons. Like it's horrible at target. You got to target the right people. First of all, it's like it's bad at targeting. It's like riots. Like now we have philosophers like Pasternak arguing like in favor of literally rioting, which is just very foolish. because there's no target discrimination. Like you have to have target discrimination. Like, so I definitely admire more the people are like, I'm going to sit on a redwood tree. Okay. When they were trying to defend the redwoods in the 70s, you know, you had this woman who like just sat on a redwood tree that was supposed to, okay, that's a whole different thing. Or at least if you're going to lie in front of something, okay, then you lie in front of a bulldozer that's going to knock down something. All right. Like, you know, like the actual, right. Then just like people going about their business and maybe trying to go to the hospital or something like that. Or you have to pick the right targets, and they're not picking the right targets. They're just trying to, and so there are these sorts of things. I have more respect for certain sorts of sabotage of machinery. Again, like if it's like, okay, well, I'm going to sabotage. I know this company is just like the agent of a larger force, but still I got to go after the company that's like going to bulldoze down this forest. Just like look, the soldier is just the arm of this larger society, but still you have to go after the soldier in war. You discriminate against targets. So okay, I'm going to sabotage this you know, bulldozer or this pipeline or something like that. That's sort of it. Once you move into criminal activities, okay. You know, those things strike me as you know, but this sort of, you know, we had this person protesting for you know, the Gazan genocide cause here a couple days ago, you know, and she's like, they're protesting and they're whatever, and they're like, bring us food for you know, I can't take this sort of like.
Wait, so are you at that institution where that particular video came out of the girl?
No,
okay,
that was Colombia. Okay. No, they would never let me. Right, we were Colombia, but you know, so, but yeah, there's just this like I can't take this where I sort of disrespect the norms in favor of you, but I claim for myself norms in favor of me. I don't like that. So whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is tough. But you know, I am not, although Chenworth has this case about, you know, peaceful resistance against regimes. I don't mean to say like I accept this without some skepticism. I think ultimately things do devolve to violence, and I do honestly put my bets in an armed population as long-term having a better security against state oppression. So, but yeah, there are a lot of complexities around that. You know, and people say, I mean, I'm not accusing you, but some of your viewers might say, well, you can't be, you know, like Joe Biden, you know, you can't fight an F-16, you know, with your AR.
I should say Joe Biden is a viewer of this channel. So.
All right. So sorry, I didn't mean to insult your viewership here, but like, yeah, that's not the idea, right? You don't have to beat. Yeah. You don't have to beat the state in a stand-up fight. And I don't think we should have a population that could beat our own state in a stand-up fight. You just have to make it costly. You have to make it drag out. You have to make it something that the government can't hush up. You don't want to be in a state where you could be easily disappeared and stuff like that, because then people get talking, then other countries get talking, then then you have to defend yourself. It just looks, people question a lot more when there's some guy behind a lot of sandbags shooting than if the guy just disappears. People just will go on their business, and so you have to create that friction, and it doesn't take nuclear weapons or people's private tanks or whatever to do that. And a second thing I just want to say about that is that if things like handguns and semi-automatic rifles were utterly useless against state oppression, then the U.S. military, when it occupies cities around the world, would be okay with the population having handguns and semi-automatic rifles, but they absolutely aren't. If you tried to ship in a truckload of handguns and semi-automatic rifles to a population that the U.S. is trying to control, they would most assuredly stop you. They would most assuredly care about that. And that's a population they don't even love. That's a population they don't even have sympathies with. Whereas, you know, in the case of Americans fighting Americans, there'd be a little more of that, although, you know, the time is coming when our own military won't be composed of Americans in true empire authoritarian terms.
Yeah. I mean, so like, I don't want to steal too much of your time, and there's no rush. I was wondering, is there anything we've left out with regard to your dignitarian defense of guns? I mean, I appreciate that we may not have covered absolutely everything, every objection, every issue.
I do think we need to worry about third parties getting killed. So like if you're attacking me and I shoot you, or if you're a spree shooter and in a mall and I pull out my gun to try to stop you, and one of my rounds hits an innocent person behind you.
Yeah.
Okay. What do we say about that? And maybe that wouldn't have happened but for our dignitarian right to guns or something like that. So can dignity ground a increased risk to third parties? And so to that, I give this example. Again, I'm trying to speak to my audience here. I give this example of Simone, who's this very attractive but poor single mom. And so she works as like a waitress. She's barely keeping her family afloat. She lives in this tenement in a dangerous side of town. So the kids have to go to a bad school and they're kind of at risk at school. They're at risk at their walk home from school. They're at risk walking up the stairs of their tenement and so forth. They're at risk maybe from police aggressively policing their bad side town. But all this could go away if Simone worked as an OnlyFans model. Okay. All this could go away if Simone worked as an OnlyFans model. But Simone, rightly or wrongly, right, thinks it's beneath her dignity to work as an OnlyFans model. So she claims a sort of a dignitarian view of work. All right. So she's claiming for herself, if we think about it, like a right to less effective work, right? like more poorly paid work, right? In pursuit of her dignity interests, or, you know, but she's putting innocent third parties, namely her children, at greater risk because of this. And so what are your intuitions about that? And so, you know, I think like a lot of my audience is like, oh, okay, she is putting her innocent children at greater risk because of her possibly misguided, by the way, views about what's dignified work. And if that's right, then you know, there's an interesting question. Then it's like, well, why can't that also be the case with respect to self-defense or resistance generally? So, you know, it's just I want the readers to know that, you know, that sort of thing is talked about in the paper towards the end.
Yeah, I have the same intuition as you about that case. I think it's a fairly convincing response. Yeah, and my intuition doesn't seem to change much if we just imagine that she has a much larger family. So like if she has lots and lots of children who are under her care, right? And so that's maybe a reason to think that this right to take the more dignified approach, or what she perceives to be the more dignified approach, isn't especially sensitive to the number of third-party victims there might be as a consequence of her decision.
Yeah, but definitely I think that people who are gun owners need to be very careful about the way they store their guns in their home.
Yep.
That's a huge concern. I grew up in a house where my dad gave no concern whatsoever. I mean, I could just open a drawer and there'd be like a loaded revolver there, just absurd. And it wasn't like he was a gun nut. It was just the 80s and, you know, whatever. And he was of a different world, you know, and that's very irresponsible. But we have these great safes nowadays, and biometric safes and so forth. And so I definitely think, conscientious gun owners, gun owners need to avail themselves of that sort of stuff. And if that's done, then gun ownership does not need to really present much of along with training and so forth, gun ownership does not need to present much of a danger to innocent third parties.
So just before we close up, one final question. What's the biggest thing, or a biggest thing, that you think people on your side of the debate get wrong when they're making their arguments? So, like, what's a mistake that you would like to kind of correct in the pro-gun side of the debate, so as to make the position more convincing?
Interesting. I watch a lot of YouTube videos of gun people. A lot of them seem to rest their argument on like the Second Amendment. So Americans will like, and so they don't really spend enough time thinking about a moral right to guns, but as opposed to just a legal right or defending a legal right to guns. But I'm no great political genius, and maybe there's like a good political reason, or maybe it turns out that people are way more activated when they talk about what actual laws protect their rights, as opposed to just giving philosophical arguments for why those rights would be good. So yeah, too many of them think about that. I think I would also say that stuff of what we talked about before, where it's like, we could retreat from society precisely because you're carrying a gun, and that's that's perverse as well. I think that I heard. But we live in, everyone's trying to estimate, like, what's going to happen with the law, because the law, we have very poor rule of law right now around guns, and depending on what the district attorney is like, and in your area where there's a shooting, you could have very different outcomes. So it's unclear. The law in a lot of jurisdictions says that I can use deadly force to protect you from a deadly assault if you're being assaulted. Okay. But my sense is that a lot of gun owners right now would be very loath to do that. And so you're getting into this sort of weird thing where it's just like, well, until they go after me, I'm not going to use deadly force. But really the only way this thing, and a lot of gun owners think, again, like, I'm not like some self-defense expert by any means. The gun. If you go online, like a lot of the gun experts on these gun channels, they tend to be like ex-military people, like these Navy SEAL types, and I think they think a lot about guns in terms of war, as opposed to self-defense situations. But they'll still talk about whatever they need to talk about to get their viewership up. But I'm kind of skeptical about my ability to defend myself with a gun in a whole lot of normal sorts of situations. And so I'm a big believer that we need to get a certain number of people in the community legally carrying guns to really get to change the payoff structure for violent criminals. And they have to be willing to protect each other, or else it doesn't really work so well. I think that there are interesting gender dynamics too. So it just doesn't. So some people talk up, and indeed I talked up, the idea of, like my case going from the rape case. I'm entering it, with the idea of women using guns to defend themselves. And guns are supposed to be this great equalizer between men and women. And, but the evidence that I see is that women just don't love having guns on them. And it weirdly is not this. It just does not seem to be this sort of equalizer. It's almost like if you give males weapons, they get way more dangerous than if you give men and women weapons, the men become even more dangerous. I don't mean dangerous in a bad way. I mean just more effective. Like it's just a force multiplier for men in a way that it isn't for women. Weirdly, I don't really know what's going on there, the full story. But so like what sort of what are the implications for women? Really, are they really helped with this sort of argument, or are they helped only if you have a society in which the men are willing to defend women who are being attacked and so forth? So yeah, but it's coming to a head. I mean, there's more and more violence on our streets. There's a huge homeless population. There's a huge mental health crisis. So there's a lot more random violence going on in American streets right now. And there are some people who have defended themselves, like the Daniel Penny case and so forth, or tried to defend a group, and they're being prosecuted. You have cases like there was this subway incident in Chicago where one man apparently raped a woman in front of a whole subway car full of people who did nothing to stop him. You have a public who's terrified who has been kind of domesticated and cowed into just taking charge of situations and stopping obvious criminal and acts of great harm from happening. So I think this is a conversation that is going to be had more and more often.
Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you so much for.
Thank you, Amos, for the interview.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
This must be late for you,
but not late for me, but like in absolute terms, it is late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for the interview. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I hope you'll come on again at some point. We can maybe talk about statues.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.